In this flip lesson, we will attempt to understand why Japan decided to wage war in the Asia-Pacific region. For a long period of time, Japan was under a feudal system of governance. Under this feudal system, the emperor had little power, and Japanese society was divided into social classes, with the shogun and samurais holding top positions in society. This system of governance came to an end with the rise of the Meiji Emperor. The Meiji Emperor sought to strengthen Japan through modernization and industrialization. Massive changes were unleashed in Japan. Out of these changes emerged a desire for wealth, power, and prestige. Japan wanted to be as strong and powerful as the Western powers, which had amassed huge wealth and built a huge empire by conquering other nations. Japan too wanted to control large territories and build a strong Japanese empire. To this end, Japan set its eyes on nearby territories. However, other European powers such as Russia saw Japan's rise as a threat. This was because Russia too had interests in the Far East. In particular, Russia was most interested in Manchuria. It wanted to establish a sphere of influence in Manchuria by establishing a military and naval base in Manchuria. Japan, however, was alarmed as it saw this as a threat to its interests in the region. To avoid a conflict with Russia, Japan offered a diplomatic agreement to Russia. Japan agreed to accept Russian influence in Manchuria. In return, Russia had to accept Japan's influence over Korea. Russia declined Japan's proposal as it saw Japan as an inferior nation. Japan responded to Russian arrogance by declaring war on Russia. This war came to be known as the Russo-Japanese War, and it took place in 1904. The Japanese defeated the Russians and gained control of the South Manchurian Railway and the southern half of the Sakhalin Islands. Japan already had control over Taiwan and Korea after the First Sino-Japanese War in 1894. The war saw China, the sleeping giant of Asia, soundly defeated by a tiny Japanese nation. The various successes that Japan experienced against a European power and a so-called Asian power only fueled Japanese ambitions to create a strong Japanese empire in the Far East. Moreover, the raw materials that Japan gained from these territories served to benefit it economically. Certainly, it looked as though Japanese aggression was the right way to go forward, given that Japan made significant gains. The USA, meanwhile, was also a growing power in the Asia-Pacific region. It did not consider Japan to be equal to Western powers. Not surprisingly, tensions between the US and Japan resulted. US racial prejudice against Japanese and other Asians only served to worsen US-Japanese relations. For instance, USA immigration laws were passed to prevent immigrants from competing for jobs with locals. Japanese were greatly offended by American racial discrimination. In 1919, Japan wanted a racial equality clause to be included in the Covenant of the League of Nations. However, the proposal was rejected as Britain and Australia did not agree to it. This caused the Japanese to be unhappy as they felt that they were not given the due respect by Western powers. This made Japan more determined than ever to prove to the Western powers that they were as strong as the Western nations. The Washington Naval Conference in 1921 only served to worsen Japanese relations with the Western powers. The conference called for a reduction in the naval forces. Japan felt unhappy as it felt that it was unfair. Japan felt that it was unfair that it had to reduce its naval strength more than the US and Britain. Hence, it walked out of the League of Nations. In summary, Japanese attitude towards the West was shaped by its relations to the West, such as during the Russo-Japanese War and the American immigration policy. Last but not least, the Washington Naval Conference and victories it gained in the battles against the Western powers reiterated its desire to become a world power. These incidents fueled Japanese ambitions further and eventually paved the way for Japan to attack other nations in the Asia-Pacific region. This eventually led to the outbreak of World War II. With this, we've come to the end of this flipped lesson. Look at the summary to find out more about the various events that led Japan to adopt an aggressive foreign policy. Thank you.